Okay, y'all, you are not going to believe the absolute mind-bending, soul-crushing story I'm about to unpack for you. This isn't just a story about a bad relationship or a flaky partner. This is about my entire life being a fabrication. This is how I found out my parents, the people who raised me, who tucked me in at night, who taught me how to ride a bike, who were my entire world, were living under false names. They were fugitives. Every single memory, every family photo, every anecdote, it was all built on a mountain of lies. You know that moment when your whole reality shifts on its axis? Mine didn't just shift, it shattered into a million irreparable pieces. This isn't just a story, this was my life and it was a sham. If you're ready for the whole unfiltered truth, and trust me, it's a lot, hit that like, subscribe right now, and honestly, share this with anyone who needs to hear it. You won't want to miss a single detail of this. Grab a drink, maybe a stiff one, because this is going to be a long ride. Alright, deep breath. Here's where it all began. It was a sweltering July afternoon, the kind where the air just hangs heavy, suffocating everything. I was 22, home from my second year at Oregon State University, trying to figure out my summer internship, and mostly just enjoying being back in my childhood bedroom. My parents, Eleanor and Arthur Vance, lived in this charming, slightly too perfect two-story house in Maplewood, Oregon. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, where the biggest scandal was Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning petunias getting eaten by deer. My mum, Eleanor, was a beloved third-grade teacher at Maplewood Elementary, famous for her Storytime voices and her endless patience. My dad, Arthur, was the quiet, unassuming head librarian at the town's small but well-loved public library. They were pillars of the community, the quintessential good, honest folk. Or so I thought. I was cleaning out the attic, a task my mum had been nagging me about for weeks. "Cassie, honey, before you go back to school, we really need to clear out some of these old boxes. They're taking up so much space," she'd said, her voice light and airy as always. The attic was a dusty, forgotten repository of childhood. Memories, old board games, faded yearbooks, my elementary school art projects, holiday decorations. I was humming along to some pop song, tossing out old broken toys, when I stumbled upon it. Tucked away behind a stack of my dad's old fishing gear, shoved into a dark corner, was a plain, unmarked cardboard box. It was smaller than the others, heavier than it looked, and wrapped tightly with industrial-strength tape. My parents were meticulous organisers. Meticulous. Every box in that attic was labelled in my mum's elegant cursive, Cassie's schoolwork, K3, Christmas decor, ornaments, Dad's old fishing gear. This box had nothing, not a single scribble, a tiny red flag, but one I immediately dismissed. Probably old tax documents or some forgotten project. My dad was a bit of a pack rat when it came to paperwork. I tugged at the tape, but it was on there good. I went downstairs, grabbed my mum's kitchen scissors, and wrestled with it for a good minute. Finally, the tape gave way with a ripping sound. I pulled back the flaps, expecting bank statements, maybe old photo albums they hadn't gotten around to labelling. What I saw inside made my stomach drop faster than a roller coaster. It wasn't tax documents. It wasn't photos. The first thing I pulled out was a driver's license, but it wasn't my dad's Oregon license. This one was from Arizona, and the name, it wasn't Arthur Vance, it was Ronald Miller. My hand started to shake. Ronald Miller. The photo was undeniably my dad, younger, a little heavier, with a different haircut, but it was him. My heart hammered against my ribs. What the hell was this? Was it a joke? A prop from a play? My dad wasn't in any plays. I dug deeper, my fingers trembling. Beneath that, another ID, a social security card. Again, Ronald Miller. And then a passport. Not Arthur Vance, not Ronald Miller. This one was David Coleman. The picture was definitely my dad, same face but a different name, again. My head was spinning. What kind of person has 3 different identities? My breath hitched. This was insane. My dad, quiet, bookish Arthur Vance. This couldn't be real. Then I found them. The newspaper clippings. tucked beneath the IDs, folded, carefully, yellowed with age. They weren't about local Maplewood events, these were from somewhere completely different. Los Angeles, California, dated 25 years ago, just before I was born. The headlines screamed, "Bank heist, suspects flee with 1.2 million. FBI launches manhunt for bank robbers. Couple identified in bank heist." My hands felt numb as I unfolded the largest clipping. It was a mugshot. My dad, Ronald Miller. Underneath, a photo of a woman. My mum. But not Eleanor Vance. This woman was named Sarah Jenkins. She looked younger, her hair a different colour, but it was undoubtedly my mother's face, her eyes wide with a fear I'd never seen in her. The article detailed a meticulously planned bank robbery, a small independent bank in downtown Los Angeles. 2 suspects, Ronald Miller and Sarah Jenkins, had pulled it off, escaping without a trace, leaving no real witnesses, just a stunned teller. The police had identified them through some discarded evidence, but they'd vanished. "Presumed to have fled the country," the article concluded. My world didn't just stop, it imploded. My parents, my gentle, loving parents. Fugitives, bank robbers. This was a nightmare. This was someone else's story. This couldn't be my story. I stared at the mugshots, then at the IDs, then back at the headlines. Ronald Miller, Sarah Jenkins, Arthur Vance, Eleanor Vance. The names blurred. The faces, once so familiar and comforting, now looked alien, like strangers. Everything I thought I knew, every foundation of my life, was crumbling around me in that dusty attic. My childhood, my memories, my very identity. Was it all a lie? My mum's voice floated up the attic stairs, light and cheerful. "Cassie, honey, everything all right up there? Want me to bring you up some lemonade?" I froze. My heart pounded. So hard I thought it would burst through my chest. Lemonade. My mum. The woman who just wanted to bring her daughter lemonade was a bank robber. The man who was reading quietly downstairs, probably cataloguing new arrivals for the library, was Ronald Miller. I frantically shoved everything back into the box, taping it back up haphazardly, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold. The tape. I pushed the box back into the darkest corner behind the fishing gear, as if simply hiding it would erase what I'd seen. My throat was tight, my eyes burning. My mind was racing, trying to process this impossible, grotesque truth. Who were these people, and what did this mean for me? The lemonade my mum brought up tasted like ash in my mouth. She smiled, oblivious, or so I thought, as she handed me the glass. "You look a little pale, sweetheart. Too much dust up here?" she asked, her brow furrowing with concern. I forced a weak smile, shaking my head. "No, Mum, just hot and dusty." I tried to make my voice sound normal, but it felt like sandpaper against my raw throat. She patted my arm, fussing over a smudge of dirt on my cheek, and then went back downstairs, her cheerful humming fading away. I watched her go, my vision swimming, a chasm opening up between us that felt wider than the Grand Canyon. From that moment on, every single thing about my life, every interaction, every memory, was re-evaluated through the lens of this terrifying revelation. And the most chilling part, they had been so good at it. My childhood had been, by all outward appearances, idyllic. Maplewood was the kind of small town that tourists stumbled upon and called charming. We lived on Elm Street, a tree-lined avenue with a mix of old Victorian houses and newer, spacious family homes. Our house had a big backyard, perfect for my golden retriever, Buster, and a swing set that my dad had built himself. My mum baked cookies for my school friends, volunteered for every school fundraiser, and had this incredible laugh that could fill a room. My dad, quiet and thoughtful, would spend hours reading to me, taking me on nature walks and teaching me how to identify constellations. They were involved in everything: PTA meetings, town festivals, the local charity drives. They were present. They were loving. They were, I truly believed, the best parents a kid could ask for. Looking back, the red flags were there waving subtly, but I was a kid. Kids don't question their parents' reality. They accept it as the reality. For instance, we never ever visited extended family. My mum would always say with a wistful sigh, "Oh, darling, my parents passed away when I was quite young, and your father's family? Well, they're scattered across the country, not really in touch." It made sense. Lots of people don't have close extended families. We just had our small, tight-knit unit of 3, plus Buster. We celebrated holidays with a couple of family. Friends, the Millers, no relation obviously, who had also moved to Maplewood around the same time as us and were equally private about their pasts. I remember thinking how cool it was that we had this self-contained, perfect little world. Now, I wondered if the Millers were in on it too. Were they other fugitives? Another thing, my parents hated photographs. Not just casual snapshots, but professional photos, anything that felt like a permanent record. They always had an excuse for why they couldn't be in a group photo at a school event, or why they preferred candid shots of me to posed family portraits. My mum would laugh it off. "Oh, you know, Arthur and I are just not photogenic." My dad would just shrug and disappear behind his book. I thought it was just quirks, their shy personalities. Now, it was chillingly obvious. They couldn't risk their faces being widely distributed, linked to their current identities. They carefully curated their public image, minimizing any potential for old connections to surface. Travel was also limited. We never went out of state, or even really far within Oregon. Our big vacations were always camping trips to national parks within a 2-hour drive or weekends at a cabin on the Oregon coast. They'd say it was because they loved nature, or that they preferred simple, quiet getaways. And I loved those. Trips! But now I understood. They couldn't risk leaving a paper trail, or having their faces scanned at airports, or running into someone from their past. They were creating a small, safe perimeter around themselves, and by extension, around me. My dad, the librarian, had an encyclopedic knowledge of history, geography, and obscure facts. He'd often say, "A good librarian knows a little bit, about everything." But he'd also get this weird, tense look on his face whenever he saw a news report about cold cases or an old crime show on TV. He'd quickly change the channel, muttering about sensationalism. My mum would just get quiet. I never thought anything of it. Everyone has their quirks. Even their possessions felt curated. We didn't have a lot of inherited heirlooms. No antique furniture from a great-aunt. No old jewellery from a grandmother. Our house was filled with things they'd bought new, or picked up at local artisan fairs. They had no childhood homes to visit, no old stomping grounds to reminisce about. It was always about the here and now, about Maplewood, about E. And I was so incredibly naive, I never saw it as anything other than them being present-focused, not dwelling on the past. Why would you, when your present was so lovely? My parents were also incredibly self-sufficient. They did all their own home repairs, handled their own finances, and rarely relied on outside help. I remember once our furnace broke down in the Yay, middle of winter, and my dad spent 3 days poring over manuals, watching YouTube videos and ordering parts online, rather than calling a professional. My mum helped him, holding flashlights, bringing him coffee. They were a team. I admired their resourcefulness. Now I realised it was about control, about minimising contact with anyone who might ask too many questions or run background checks. They rarely talked about their pasts, not really. My mum would mention growing up on the East Coast vaguely, never a specific state or city. My dad would just say he was from the Midwest and that his parents were gone. I never questioned it. People have private lives. People move on. My parents were so kind and loving, I just assumed their past was simply uneventful, or perhaps painful, and they didn't want to revisit it. It all clicked into place after I found that box, the carefully constructed narrative of their lives. The reasons for their privacy, the small quiet town they chose, the jobs they took, librarian and elementary school teacher, professions that didn't require extensive background checks or high levels of public scrutiny, and which offered a gentle, low-profile existence. My perfect parents, my normal childhood, it was all a meticulously crafted illusion, and I, their beloved daughter, was the ultimate prop in their elaborate, lifelong performance. It was a golden cage, and I hadn't even realised I was trapped inside until the bars rusted and shattered, revealing the horrifying truth outside. And now, with the memory of the faded headlines and mugshots burned into my mind, every single piece of that perfect life felt tainted, a cruel joke. I was Cassie Vance, daughter of Eleanor and Arthur. But who were Eleanor and Arthur? And if they weren't Eleanor and Arthur, then who was I, really? The realisation that my entire identity was built on a foundation of lies was the most terrifying, gut-wrenching feeling I had ever experienced. The ground beneath me wasn't just shaking, it was gone. The day after I found the box, I felt like I was moving through thick, stagnant water. Every sound, every movement, every glance from my parents felt amplified, loaded with meaning. I watched them, really watched them, for the first time, and it was like seeing ghosts, or rather like seeing strangers wearing the faces of my parents. My mum, Eleanor, was humming in the kitchen, making her famous blueberry pancakes. She asked me about my internship search, about my friends Chloe and Sarah. I answered in monosyllables, my mind racing a mile a minute. Was she acting? Was this concern genuine? Or was it just part of the charade? I looked at her hands, the familiar lines, the slight callus on her thumb from years of grading papers and gardening. These were the hands that had held mine, had comforted me. These were also, according to a yellowed newspaper clipping, the hands that had helped carry a duffel bag filled with stolen cash out of a bank. The disconnect was sickening. My dad, Arthur, came down for breakfast, his usual quiet self, lost in a new book on ancient civilizations. He grunted a morning greeting, poured his coffee, and settled into his armchair. I kept glancing at him, trying to superimpose the mugshot of Ronald Miller onto his face. The resemblance was undeniable, terrifying. The same eyes, the same set. To his jaw, just older, softer now. Was he thinking about it? Did he ever think about what they'd done? Or had they buried it so deep that it was just part of the everyday fabric of their false lives? I couldn't bring myself to confront them. Not yet. I was paralysed by fear and confusion. What would I say? Mum, Dad, I found your fugitive identities and evidence you robbed a bank before I was born. Want to talk about it over pancakes? It felt absurd, grotesque. I needed time to process, to figure out what was real and what wasn't. I needed more answers, but I had no idea how to get them without tipping them off, so I did what any terrified, confused 22-year-old would do in the age of the internet. I went online. After breakfast, I retreated to my room, pulling my laptop onto my bed. I pulled out my phone and used its flashlight to illuminate the corner of the attic, confirming. The box was still hidden, undisturbed. Then, heart-pounding, I started typing. First, I searched Ronald Miller and Sarah Jenkins and Los Angeles bank robbery 1999. The results flooded in. More articles, slightly different angles, but the same story. The same names. The same date. Some articles even included grainy photos that were clearly younger versions of my parents. The FBI had indeed been involved. The case was listed as cold but unresolved. No arrests, no leads since their disappearance. Then I searched for Maplewood, Oregon, and Vance, Arthur, and Eleanor. And guess what? Absolutely nothing before. Their supposed move there about 20 years ago, according to local records my dad, being the librarian, would always mention. No old addresses, no distant relatives ever listed in any public databases. It was like they had materialised out of thin air in Maplewood. It just confirmed what the box told me. They were a blank slate before then. I spent the next few days in a haze, pretending to be busy with internship applications, but really, I was a digital detective, consumed by a chilling obsession. I searched for witness protection program to see if there was a chance they were in it, but the details didn't quite fit. Usually, people in WITSEC are cooperating witnesses, not perpetrators. And the bank robbery wasn't something they were testifying about. They were responsible for it. It seemed they had simply disappeared off the grid, creating new identities for themselves. I started looking at old photos of them from my childhood. Pictures from my first birthday party, my kindergarten graduation, family vacations to the coast. Now their smiles looked different. Not less loving, but guarded. Like they were always performing, always aware of the camera, always conscious of the fragile reality they had built. It was a subtle shift in perspective, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. My mum's perfect posture, her bright, fixed smile in some photos. My dad's tendency to stand slightly behind her, or with his hand shielding part of his face. I had always thought it was just them being a bit camera shy. Now it screamed deception. The weight of this secret was crushing me. I couldn't talk. To Chloe, my best friend since kindergarten, what would I say? My parents are bank robbers? She'd think I was crazy, or worse, she'd be scared of them, of me. I felt utterly alone, trapped in this terrifying new reality with two strangers who called themselves my parents. One evening, my dad asked me to help him carry some boxes of old books from the garage to the library for a book drive. As we were lifting a particularly heavy box, I noticed something. On his left forearm, almost completely faded, was a tattoo. It was small, just a symbol, almost like a stylized lightning bolt. I'd never seen it before, or maybe I'd seen it but dismissed. It is just a random tattoo. It was barely visible, faded to a greenish grey. "Hey, Dad," I said, trying to sound casual. "I never noticed you had a tattoo there." He froze. His hand, which was gripping the bottom of the box, tightened so hard his knuckles went white. He looked up, his eyes darting to my face, then quickly away. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, fear, recognition, guilt, before he quickly pulled his sleeve down, covering it. "Oh, that old thing." He chuckled, a forced, unnatural sound. "Just something stupid I got back in my wild youth. Doesn't mean anything, barely even visible anymore." He quickly changed the subject, asking me about my classes, about anything other than the tattoo. But I had seen it, and it was etched into my memory. That symbol. It was a lightning bolt, stylized almost like a letter Z'd with an arrow through it. It was so specific. Back in my room, my heart still racing from the interaction, I typed it into Google. Lightning bolt Z tattoo symbol. The first few results were irrelevant. Comic book characters, rock bands. But then an image popped up. It was a photo from an old crime blog, listing common symbols used by various radical groups in the late 20th century. And there it was. The exact stylized lightning bolt. It was identified as a symbol occasionally used by a small radical environmentalist group from the late 90s, active in California, known for property damage and, in one instance, a violent confrontation during a protest. The article mentioned they were highly anti-establishment, rejecting corporate greed and government control. And then I found another article, linked from that blog. A newspaper archive from 1999. It detailed the aftermath of a protest in Los Angeles that had turned violent, involving members of this very same environmentalist group. And guess who was listed as having been briefly questioned, then released, due to lack of evidence but still present at the scene? Ronald Miller and Sarah Jenkins. My blood ran cold. The bank robbery wasn't just about money. It was connected to this, to a deeper, more radical past. My parents weren't just common criminals trying to escape justice. They were ideologues. They were people who believed in a cause that might have justified their actions in their own minds. And that lightning bolt tattoo, faded and hidden, was a silent, terrifying testament to their true, hidden identities. My parents weren't just hiding who they were hiding what they believed in, what they had done. And the scale of their deception, the layers of lies, felt like a suffocating blanket tightening around me. I felt like I was drowning, and I had no idea how to come up for air. The air in the house wasn't just hot and dusty anymore. It was thick with unspoken words, with secrets swirling like invisible particles I could almost taste. Every glance from my mum, every casual remark from my dad, felt like a loaded weapon. I was constantly on edge, dissecting every word, every gesture, searching for more cracks in their perfectly constructed facade. It was exhausting. I was living with two people who were simultaneously my loving parents and absolute strangers, and the cognitive dissonance was tearing me apart. My mum, Eleanor, usually the most outwardly cheerful, started becoming jumpy. Not just like someone who's had too much coffee, but genuinely startled by small things. A sudden knock at the door, the phone ringing unexpectedly, even the mail truck pulling up outside. She'd flinch. Her eyes would dart to the window, a fleeting shadow of panic crossing her face before she'd quickly compose herself, forcing a smile. "Oh, just startled me, that's all," she'd say, a little too brightly. I remembered her patience, her serene demeanour. This was not Eleanor Vance. This was Sarah Jenkins, a woman on the run, and I saw her slipping. One afternoon, a couple of days after my tattoo discovery, the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Albright from next door, wanting to borrow a cup of sugar for her famous lemon bars. Simple, right? My mum went to the door, and I saw her take a subtle, almost imperceptible step back, her hand lingering on the doorknob like she was ready to slam it shut. Her smile was pasted on, tight at the corners. She chatted with Mrs. Albright for a minute, and I could hear Mrs. Albright mention something about the upcoming town summer picnic, asking if my parents were planning to sign up for the three-legged race again. My mum's response was oddly hesitant. "Oh, we haven't decided yet, Mary. Arthur's been so busy with new acquisitions at the library, and I've got some lesson plans to finalise before the fall. You know how it is." It was a perfectly plausible excuse, but the way she delivered it with a forced lightness and the quick, almost desperate glance she shot towards my dad's study where he was presumably reading, it screamed avoidance. Before, I would have thought nothing of that. Now, every small interaction was a data point. They were shrinking their world even further, avoiding public gatherings, even small innocent ones. They had always been active, but I realised recently it was always within their controlled parameters. PTA meetings, yes, where they were known and safe. Library book drives, sure. But anything that required new exposure, new connections, or detailed personal information, that was a no-go. My dad, Arthur, started becoming even more withdrawn. He'd always been quiet, but now he was practically hermetic. He'd spend hours in his study, door closed, under the guise of researching new literary trends or planning library programmes. But sometimes I'd walk past and hear him on the phone, his voice low, almost a whisper, completely unlike his normal calm, resonant tone. He'd pause abruptly if he heard me approaching, and then, if I asked who he was talking to, he'd quickly say, "Oh, just a colleague from the State Librarians Association," or "wrong number." His explanations were too quick, too neat. He never left his phone lying around either. It was always in his pocket or charging in his study. That was a new habit. I started noticing other things. They were meticulous about shredding documents. Not just regular junk mail, but everything. Bank statements, utility bills, even old grocery lists. "Waste not, want not, darling," my mum would chirp as the shredder whirred. I used to think it was just them being environmentally conscious and tidy. Now, I wondered what they were truly afraid of leaving behind. Any shred of paper that might link them to an address, a name, a date. It was a compulsion. One evening, we were watching a documentary about unsolved crimes. My dad had somehow forgotten to change the channel before I came into the living room. The documentary featured old FBI files showing grainy surveillance footage from a bank. My dad literally stiffened on the couch beside me. He looked at the screen, and for a split second I saw it. Pure, unadulterated terror in his eyes. Then like a switch it vanished, replaced by a forced yawn. "This is getting awfully dull, isn't it, Cassie?" he said, his voice a little too loud, reaching for the remote. "How about that new sci-fi movie you wanted to watch?" He changed the channel so fast the screen blurred. I just nodded, pretending to be engrossed in the sudden alien invasion, but my gut was screaming. He was practically vibrating with anxiety. Another thing that started happening more frequently, they'd start talking about what-ifs, not in a casual, philosophical way, but with an underlying current of anxiety. "What if there was a big earthquake, Cassie?" my mum would ask, out of nowhere. "Do you know where all our emergency supplies are? Do you have an evacuation plan? Or my dad would say, it's a good thing we've always lived simply, isn't it? Things can be replaced, but people can't. It was like they were rehearsing for an emergency, for a sudden need to disappear again. It was a bizarre kind of coded language, one I only now understood. They weren't talking about a natural disaster, they were talking about capture. They also started subtly trying to gauge my interest in my life, away from them. Are you really enjoying Oregon State, sweetheart? My mum asked one morning over coffee. You seem to love living on campus. Maybe you should look into opportunities. To stay there after graduation, find a job in Corvallis. It was an innocent question on the surface, but it felt like they were testing the waters, trying to see how much I was tied to Maplewood, to them. Was it a gentle nudge towards making my own life elsewhere, so that if they had to vanish, I wouldn't be left holding the bag? The thought was a sickening twist in my stomach. I became hyper-aware of their financial habits. We never lived extravagantly. My dad's librarian salary and my mum's teacher salary were comfortable, but not lavish. They paid for everything in cash whenever possible. When they did use a card, it was usually a debit card, not credit. And I never saw credit card statements lying around. Now I know that credit cards create a lengthy financial trail, and fugitives try to avoid them at all costs. I remembered my dad always saying, "Cash is king, Cassie. Keeps things simple." Simple or untraceable. The Millers, our family friends, became another point of paranoid observation. They were the couple my parents celebrated holidays with. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, owners of the local hardware store, were just as private about their pasts as my parents. I started wondering if they were in the same boat. Were they also fugitives? Was Maplewood some kind of quiet, off-the-grid commune for people hiding from their pasts? The thought was insane, but it lodged itself firmly in my mind. The Millers also never talked about extended family, also avoided photos, also seemed perfectly self-sufficient. Coincidence? Or a network of deception? My parents also became overly concerned with my safety. It wasn't the normal parental worry. It was intense. Are you sure you told your friends exactly where you're going? Did you lock the door the moment you came inside? Are you paying attention to who's around you when you're out alone? My dad once gave me a lecture about situational awareness that lasted an hour, detailing escape routes from public places, and how to identify someone who might be following you. I thought it was just him being a protective dad, maybe a little over the top. Now I realised he was teaching me how to be a fugitive, inadvertently preparing me for a world where you could never trust anyone, where constant vigilance was the price of freedom. He was teaching me the skills he and my mum had, perfected over 2 decades, and that was the most chilling red flag of all. They weren't just trying to protect themselves. They were trying to protect me from their past, and in doing so they were implicitly admitting its danger. The paranoia wasn't mine alone. It was theirs, deeply ingrained, bubbling to the surface. It was all so damn subtle, so integrated into their normal behaviour that I'd never seen it. Until now. And now, every tiny anomaly was a blaring siren. I was drowning in suspicion, and I needed more than just a gut feeling. I needed proof. Hard proof. The weight of what I knew, or rather suspected, became unbearable. Living under the same roof with them, pretending everything was normal, felt like a perverse theatrical production. I was the unwitting audience, and my parents were giving the sucky performance of their lives. But I knew the script, and I knew the horrifying truth behind the costumes. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. My mind was a relentless hamster wheel of theories and fears. I needed to move, to act, to find more answers. But how? Confronting them now, without more definitive proof, felt reckless. What if they denied everything? What if they vanished again, this time taking me with them, or worse, leaving me behind to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives? My gut screamed at me, investigate, quietly, terrifyingly. My first target was the attic box. I needed to examine its contents more thoroughly. I waited until they were both out of the house. My mum at the elementary school for an after-hours parent-teacher conference, my dad at the library for a late-night book club meeting. I crept upstairs, my heart hammering like a drum solo against my ribs. The attic felt different now, no longer a repository of innocent memories, but a vault of dark secrets. I found the box, still haphazardly taped, exactly where I'd shoved it. My hands trembled as I pulled it out again. This time I was methodical. I spread a clean sheet on the floor and carefully laid out every item. The Arizona driver's license. For Ronald Miller, the Social Security card, the passport for David Coleman. All photos were unmistakably my dad. Then there was my mum's Arizona ID, Sarah Jenkins, same. Her passport, also for Sarah Jenkins. A tiny part of me hoped for a mistake, a clerical error, a prop from a local play, but the yellowed newspaper clippings were undeniable. I took photos of everything with my phone, silently praying I wouldn't be caught. The dates, the names, the bank, everything matched my online findings. But there was more. Tucked beneath the stack of clippings, I found a small, worn, leather-bound journal. It had no name on it. My hands shook as I opened it. The handwriting was neat, precise. It was my mum's. But the content? It wasn't a diary of daily life. It was a log. A meticulous record of locations, dates, and what looked like cash withdrawals from various anonymous ATMs, sometimes with cryptic notes next to them like supplies, rent, new location, utilities, burner phone. The dates stretched back, years, covering the entire period before they supposedly moved to Maplewood. It chronicled a life on the move, a life of constant vigilance and calculated expenses. She logged pseudonyms they'd used, temporary addresses, even the names of people they'd had brief, transient encounters with. It was their survival guide, a cold, clinical record of their hidden existence. This wasn't just about the bank robbery, anymore. It was about the life they built around it. There were also some loose pages tucked into the back of the journal. They were sketches, detailed drawings of a small nondescript bank, its layout, the vault, the teller windows, even a crude map of the surrounding streets. It was undoubtedly the bank from the news articles. And then a series of notes, scribbled quickly, almost illegibly, about targets and resources. It felt like a blueprint for the robbery itself, or at least the planning that led up to it. My stomach clenched. This wasn't just about escaping, it was about the active, intentional act. They planned this. I found another hidden compartment in the box. It was a false bottom, cleverly constructed. Inside, wrapped in a plastic bag, were two small, tarnished silver lockets. I opened the first one. Inside, a tiny, faded photo of a very young man and woman. They looked exactly like my parents, but so much younger, almost kids. And under the photo, engraved, were the initials RM and SJ, Ronald Miller, Sarah Jenkins. The second locket had a similar photo, but the initials were DC and LG David Coleman, and who was LG? Another identity for my mum? Or someone else entirely? The thought sent a fresh wave of dread through me. How many layers of lies were there? I also found a small, discreet digital camera. It was old, but still worked. I charged it and scrolled through the photos. They weren't family snapshots. They were photos of surveillance, pictures of the bank taken from different angles, at different times of day. Photos of the tellers, the security guards, the alarm systems. Photos of the streets, traffic patterns, potential escape routes. It was disturbing, like looking through the eyes of a predator. These weren't loving parents, these were skilled, calculating criminals. The journal confirmed the LG initials from the locket. My mum had gone by Laura Gibson for a brief period. In Phoenix before settling on Eleanor Vance in Oregon. That meant another identity. 3 for my dad, 3 for my mum. The sheer audacity. Armed with this new trove of information, I decided to broaden my secret investigation. I became a master of digital forensics, learning about public record databases, obscure online forums, old news archives that weren't immediately searchable. I used burner VPNs, incognito browsers, and disposable email addresses to protect my digital footprint. I was terrified they'd see my search history, that they'd realise I was onto them. Every click was a risk. I started cross-referencing names and dates from the journal with public records in the states they had briefly lived in, Arizona, Nevada, even a brief stint in New Mexico. What I found was chilling. Ronald Miller and Sarah Jenkins had indeed existed in those states, but their records abruptly ended in Phoenix, Arizona, about a year before I was born. Then Eleanor Vance and Arthur Vance mysteriously appeared in Maplewood, Oregon, with no prior digital footprint connecting them to any previous address or activity. It was a perfect, almost too perfect, disappearing act. I also looked into the environmentalist group from the article connected to my dad's tattoo. They were called the Earth Zealots. Catchy, right? But what I read made my blood run cold. While initially focused on peaceful protests, their ideology had radicalized, advocating for direct action against perceived corporate polluters and the financial institutions that supported them. Some members had been involved in property damage, and yes, there were mentions of a fundraising strategy that involved redistributing wealth from corrupt institutions. This wasn't just a bank robbery, it was a political statement, a twisted form of protest. The $1.2 million wasn't just for them to live on, it was likely funding for their cause, or at least part of it. The bank they targeted had ties to a timber company accused of illegal logging in national forests. It added a layer of complexity, and frankly, a layer of fear. My parents weren't just common thieves. They were committed, dangerous ideologues. The more I dug, the more I discovered about Earth Zealots. They had operated in cells, small autonomous units to avoid detection. This explained the Millers, our family friends. I looked up their names, Harold and Martha Miller, and traced their public records. And boom, similar pattern. They too had materialised in Maplewood around the same time as my parents, with no prior public records. And Harold Miller had a faint, almost invisible scar on his wrist, a mark that, in the crime blog about the Earth Zealots, was mentioned as a common spot for a similar small symbolic tattoo that could be easily hidden. Were they part of the same cell? The puzzle pieces were falling into place, forming a terrifying, complete picture. I started leaving subtle hints, just to see their reaction. "Hey, Mum, I saw this crazy documentary about people who change their identities. I'd say casually over dinner." My mum would smile tightly. "Oh, darling, people do the strangest things, don't they?" My dad would just clear his throat and look at his plate. No flicker, no tell. They were masters of the poker face. But the most chilling discovery came when I looked up my own birth certificate. Eleanor Vance and Arthur Vance were listed as my parents, but my birth date was approximately 8 months after the Los Angeles bank robbery. And the city of birth? Portland, Oregon. Not Los Angeles, not Phoenix, not even Maplewood. They had gone to a larger city, likely to avoid any potential scrutiny, had me, then moved to the quiet town of Maplewood, establishing their new, quiet lives. I was born into the lie. My very existence was a consequence of their crime, their escape. I was a child of fugitives, born under false names. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Who was I, truly? Cassie Vance? Or Cassie Miller? Or Cassie Jenkins? Or was I just the daughter of Ronald and Sarah, or David and Laura? I felt like a phantom, my identity erased by their desperation. The secret was no longer just theirs, it was mine, and it was suffocating. I couldn't live with it anymore. The mountain of evidence I had secretly compiled, the truth I had painstakingly uncovered, it demanded to be brought into the light. I had to confront them. The decision to confront them was not sudden. It was a slow, agonizing creep, driven by the suffocating weight of the truth. Every breath I took felt like a lie. Every word they spoke, a deception. I couldn't look them in the eye anymore without seeing the fugitives, the ideologues, the people who had stolen a life and built another on its ashes. And I was living in that ash. I felt like I was going to explode. The emotional pressure cooker was at its limit. The final straw came during a quiet family dinner. My mum had made my favourite lasagna, her specialty, rich with layers of cheese and sauce. My dad was telling a perfectly normal, mundane story about a new exhibit at the library about Oregon wildflowers. They were smiling, laughing, acting like the perfect, loving parents they had always appeared to be. And I looked at them, and it was like a curtain dropped. I saw the performance, the meticulous control, the carefully curated normalcy. And I saw the lies, staring back at me from their familiar faces. I felt a cold rage bubbling inside me, a silent scream building in my chest. How dare they? How dare they build this beautiful fake life around me, make me complicit in their deception without my knowledge? My voice, when I spoke, sounded surprisingly steady, almost too calm. "Mum, Dad," I said, setting my fork down carefully, on the plate. "We need to talk. About something important." They both looked at me, their smiles fading. My mum's hand, which had been reaching for her wineglass, froze mid-air. My dad's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable. In them, a guardedness that was now painfully obvious. They knew. They had to know. My sudden seriousness, the tension in my voice, it was unlike me, the usually cheerful, unassuming Cassie. "Cassie, darling, is everything all right?" my mum asked, her voice tinged with a concern that, in that moment, felt utterly false. "You look a little pale." "It's not about me being pale, Mum," I said, my voice gaining strength, though my hands were clammy under the table. "It's about who we are, who you are." My dad cleared his throat, setting his own fork down beside his half-eaten lasagna. "What exactly are you getting at, Cassie?" His tone was even, controlled, but I saw the muscles tense in his jaw, a tiny tremor in his hand as he clasped it. This was the man who kept a poker face for decades, but even he was showing strain. I stood up, walked into the living room, and came back with the old cardboard box. The very same box I'd found in the attic. I placed it gently on the dining table, between us, like a bomb. It sat there, unassuming, yet radiating menace, its haphazardly retaped seams screaming of its recent disturbance. My mum's eyes widened, her face draining of colour faster than spilled milk. My dad's composure finally cracked. He stared at the box, then at me, then back at the box. A vein pulsed in his temple, a silent, frantic beat against his skin. "What is that, Cassie?" my mum whispered, her voice barely audible, thin with fear. It was the voice of Sarah Jenkins, not Eleanor Vance. I ripped the tape off, deliberately, slowly. The ripping sound echoed in the silent dining room, unnaturally loud. I pulled back the flaps. I reached in and pulled out the Arizona driver's license with Ronald Miller on it, and placed it on the table. Then the passport for David Coleman. And finally, the large, yellowed newspaper clipping, unfolding it to reveal their mugshots and the screaming headline, "Bank Heist, Suspects Flee with $1.2 million." I slid them across the table, one by one, towards them. My mum gasped, a small, choked sound, her hand flying to her mouth. My dad pushed his chair back, a violent scrape of wood against the floor. He stared at the damning evidence, then at me, then back at the box. His face was a mask of disbelief and betrayal. Not his betrayal, but mine for discovering his secret, for shattering his carefully constructed piece. Ronald Miller. Sarah Jenkins, I stated, my voice trembling now, but firm, unwavering. Arthur Vance, Eleanor Vance. Who are you, really? My mum started to cry, silent tears streaming down her face, glistening in the soft dining room light. She looked utterly broken, like a trapped animal, desperate for an escape that wasn't there. My dad, however, was silent, his gaze fixed on the newspaper clipping, his jaw set in a rigid line. His silence was more terrifying than my mum's tears, a cold, hard wall. We can explain, Cassie, my mum sobbed, reaching a trembling hand out towards me, as if to plead or to stop me. Can you? I retorted, My voice rising, fueled by years of pent-up anger and hurt, the raw emotion finally breaking free. Can you explain why my entire life has been a lie? Why every memory I have of my loving, honest parents is built on the fact that you robbed a bank and changed your names? Why I grew up thinking my life was normal, when it was a carefully constructed prison of secrets? My voice cracked on the last word. I pulled out the old journal next, its worn leather cover a stark contrast to our polished dining table, flipping it open to a page with their aliases and travel logs. Is this part of the explanation? The life on the run, the constant disappearing acts, the burner phones and anonymous ATMs? I shoved it closer to him. And this. I opened the small digital camera and put it on the table, its small screen showing the grainy surveillance photos of the Liberty Savings Bank. Was this for a school project, Dad? Or was this part of the research for the library? My voice was dripping with sarcasm, a bitter metallic taste in my mouth. My dad finally looked up, his eyes hard, blazing with an unfamiliar fury. Cassie, you don't understand, he said, his voice low and gravelly, strained. This is not what it seems. Oh, really? I challenged him, stepping closer, my own fury giving me courage. Because to me it seems pretty clear. My parents are fugitives, bank robbers, and you were part of some radical environmentalist group, the Earth Zealots, that used violence and theft to fund your cause, weren't you? That's what this tattoo means, isn't it? My hand shot out, pulling up the sleeve of his shirt, exposing the faded greenish-grey lightning bolt on his forearm. A silent, damning symbol. His body stiffened, and he yanked his arm away, pulling the sleeve down in a furious, almost violent gesture. "You've been snooping!" he snarled, his voice no longer calm but laced with a raw, guttural fury I had never heard from him before. His eyes, usually gentle and kind, were now burning with an intensity that sent a fresh wave of ice down my spine. This wasn't Arthur Vance. This was Ronald Miller, cornered and dangerous, stripped bare. "Damn right I've been snooping," I shouted back, tears finally blurring my vision, hot and unwelcome. Because I couldn't reconcile the parents I thought I had with the strangers I was starting to see. You left me no choice. You forced me to become a detective in my own home because you refused to be honest. You built my entire life on a lie. My mum broke down completely, a wrenching, uncontrolled sob escaping her, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, desperate weeping. My dad stood rigidly, staring at me across the table, his face a terrifying mixture of anger, fear, and something else. A profound, weary resignation. The air was heavy, charged with raw emotion, thick and suffocating. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by my mum's quiet weeping. I looked at the table, at the incriminating items, then back at their haunted faces, at the faces of my parents and their aliases. This was it, the moment of truth. My whole life, every single thread, was unravelling right here, right now. There was no going back. And the question hung in the air, thick and suffocating, burning like acid in my throat. What would they say? Would they confess finally after all these years? Or would they try to spin another web of lies, dragging me deeper into their tangled deception? The silence stretched, unbearable, begging for answers. The silence in that dining room after my outburst was agonising. My mum was still sobbing, completely broken, her face a mask of crumpled fear. My dad, Arthur or Ronald or David, whoever he truly was, stood rigid, his eyes boring into mine, a mix of anger, fear, and a deep, weary defeat. The lasagna, once a symbol of our seemingly perfect family, sat cold and untouched on the table, a grim centerpiece to the wreckage of our lives. Finally, my dad sagged into his chair, the fury draining out of him, replaced by a profound exhaustion that seemed to age him 20 years in an instant. He rubbed his temples, his gaze distant, lost in some far-off painful memory. My mum, still weeping uncontrollably, reached for his hand across the table, and he squeezed it, a silent, desperate communication passing between them, a shared history, of fear and desperation that I was only just beginning to comprehend. "Cassie," my dad began, his voice hoarse, barely a whisper, as if the words themselves were physically painful to utter. "Please, sit down. We owe you the truth. All of it, there's nothing left to hide." I hesitated, my heart still thumping like a frantic bird, my body vibrating with adrenaline and a strange, cold certainty. But I sat. I had to. I needed answers. I needed to understand. My entire reality had been ripped open and I needed to know what had been lurking underneath. My mum lifted her tear-streaked face, her eyes red and swollen. It started a long time ago, sweetheart," she choked out, her voice raw, cracking. "Before you were born, we were so young, so passionate, naive in some ways about the consequences. We truly believed we were doing a right thing." My dad took a deep, shuddering breath, the kind that feels like it's pulling air from the very bottom of your soul. "We were Ronald Miller and Sarah Jenkins. We were in Los Angeles. It was the late 90s, and the world... It felt like it was dying, Cassie. Corporate greed was rampant. Environmental destruction was accelerating at an alarming pace. We were part of a movement, the Earth Zealots, that believed in direct action. We believed in fighting back, not just with protests and petitions, but with real tangible acts against the system that was destroying the planet for profit." I stared at them, trying to absorb this new, horrifying origin story. So the bank robbery, that was for the cause. It wasn't just for money. The thought made it almost worse, adding a layer of ideological fanaticism. My mum nodded, a fresh wave of tears springing to her eyes. "Yes. Liberty Savings Bank, the one we targeted, was a primary financial backer for Evergreen Lumber, a massive timber corporation that was clear-cutting ancient forests in Oregon and Northern California. They were destroying vital ecosystems, ignoring regulations, polluting water sources. We saw them as instruments of environmental destruction, and the bank as their accomplice. We believed taking their money was restitution, a way to reclaim what was being stolen from the earth, to disrupt their operations, and to fund real change. We weren't just common criminals, Cassie," my dad added, his voice gaining a strange, almost defiant resonance, a flicker of the old zealot burning in his eyes. "We believed we were fighting a greater evil. We saw ourselves as modern-day Robin Hoods, taking from the corrupt to give back, to the fight, to help those who were trying to protect the planet." "To give back to the fight?" I scoffed, the bitterness rising in my throat, tasting like bile. "So you stole $1.2 million, made your statement, and then you ran. You used that money to build this life, this quiet, comfortable, fake life, while others were still fighting. The fight you abandoned." My mum flinched as if I'd slapped her. "Not all of it, Cassie, please. A significant portion. That went to fund other actions, to support underground environmental initiatives, to help others who were suffering because of corporate negligence. We kept enough to disappear, to start over, yes, but primarily to raise you safely away from that life." "Safely?" I yelled, unable to contain my anger, my voice cracking with the force of it. "Safely? My entire life is a lie. My name, my identity, it's all fake. My childhood memories tainted. How is that safe? How is that loving? What kind of parents do that to their child?" My dad held up a trembling hand, his own pain evident in his eyes. "We know, Cassie, and we are so sorry for the pain we've caused you. More than you can ever imagine. But we truly believed it was the only way. After the robbery, the FBI was closing in fast. We knew we couldn't stay. And then Sarah found out she was pregnant." He looked at my mum, a tender, broken expression on his face that momentarily softened his hardened features. You were already on the way. We had to make an impossible choice. Continue the fight and risk everything, including your life, exposing you to danger, to poverty, to a life on the run. Or disappear, sever all ties, and give you a normal life. A safe life. My mum nodded, sniffing, desperate for me to understand. "We chose you, Cassie. We left the movement. We severed all ties. We found a fixer, a man who specialised in new identities for people like us. He was expensive, but he was good, a ghost in the system. He gave us new names, new histories. He set us up in Phoenix as Ronald and Sarah for a few months, just to create a temporary, untraceable trail, then helped us get to Portland, where you were born, and then here, to Maplewood, as Eleanor and Arthur Vance. So, David Coleman and Laura Gibson, I interjected, remembering the other names, from the lockets and journal, the layers of their deceit. My dad nodded, his eyes still distant, recalling the convoluted path they'd forged. Those were temporary identities, used for specific, one-time transactions after we were all ready. On the run, extra layers of obfuscation just in case, to make it harder for anyone to connect the dots if they ever got close. He sighed, a profound weariness in the sound. We chose Maplewood because it was small, quiet, off the main grid. My job at the library, your mother's teaching position, they were perfect covers, low-key, respected, no deep background. Checks beyond basic state requirements. We built a life, a real life for you. Every day for 22 years, we lived in fear of being discovered, but we were so desperate to give you everything we couldn't have in our past lives. A real home, a real community, a real childhood. My mum started talking about the intricate details of the robbery, how they'd planned it for months, using their skills, their connections from the Earth Zealots. My dad chimed in, detailing the intricate security flaws they exploited at Liberty, savings, the precise timing, the getaway routes. It was chilling to hear them recount it, like they were describing a perfectly executed military operation, not a felony that had forever altered their lives and, unknowingly, mine. They even spoke about the duffel bag, how they had to abandon a portion of the cash they couldn't carry in their haste to escape, leaving it behind in an alley, a small detail I hadn't seen in the news articles. The money wasn't just for us, Cassie. Please believe that, my mum pleaded, her voice cracking. We sent a large sum anonymously to support land trusts and ecological restoration projects across the country. They're still active today, doing good work. The rest, we lived off it carefully over the years. We didn't spend it lavishly. We invested it quietly, made it last. It was our shield, our security, for you. For your future. I looked at them, my vision still swimming, trying desperately to reconcile the two realities. The loving parents who taught me how to ride a bike, who patiently helped me with homework, who celebrated my birthdays and band concerts, and the radical bank robbers who meticulously planned a heist, vanished into thin air, and spent 2 decades living a lie, all while fearing discovery. The love felt real, painfully real, but it was born from a foundation of absolute falsehood, a garden grown on toxic soil. What about the Millers? I asked, remembering my chilling suspicions about our family friends, Harold and Martha, the hardware store owners. Are they part of this too? My parents exchanged a look, a silent, knowing glance that confirmed my worst fears. My dad hesitated, then nodded slowly, a sigh escaping his lips. Harold and Martha. They were part of our cell, yes, the Portland cell. They chose a different path after the robbery, a slightly more public but still hidden life. They opened the hardware store as their cover. We kept in touch sparingly for support. They're good people, Cassie. They believed in the cause too. They also wanted to give their children a normal life. Another layer of the lie peeled back. Another family. Another set of children, unknowingly entangled in this web of secrets. My world felt so much bigger, so much more complex, and so much smaller, confined by their hidden histories all at once. My mum then went into the emotional toll, the constant fear, the paranoia, every new face, every unexpected car on the street, every news report about cold cases or fugitives. She described how they'd spent years studying new habits, new mannerisms, perfecting their Eleanor and Arthur personas until they were second nature, until the lines between truth and fiction blurred even for them. They lived a life of quiet, desperation, where every mistake, every slip could cost them everything. They even had an emergency plan, a hidden stash of cash and more fake IDs, ready to go at a moment's notice just in case. They never wanted to have to use it, to vanish from my life, to abandon the only stability I had ever known. "We watched you grow up, Cassie," my dad said, his voice thick with raw emotion, tears finally welling in his own eyes. "We saw your innocence, your trust in us, and every single day we felt the crushing weight of our secret, the guilt of lying to you. But we couldn't. We couldn't risk your safety. We couldn't risk losing you." I saw the raw pain in their eyes, the profound regret, the years of hidden fear and sacrifice. It wasn't just a confession. It was an unloading of a lifetime of burdens, a desperate plea for understanding and forgiveness. And a part of me, the part that still loved them unconditionally, that recognized their genuine efforts to be good parents despite their past, ached for them. But another part, the rational, betrayed part, was reeling from the magnitude of the lie, the sheer audacity of it all. "So all those red flags," I murmured, my gaze drifting around our perfectly normal dining room, at the familiar family photos on the wall, pictures now seen through a terrifying new lens. The no extended family, the avoiding pictures, the limited travel, the shredding. Documents, the sudden jumpiness, the coded what-ifs. It was all real. It was all because you were fugitives, because you were on the run. They nodded, tears streaming down my mum's face, my dad's jaw set. "And my birth certificate?" I asked, the ultimate betrayal for me, the core of my identity. "Portland, 8 months after the robbery. You gave me a fake name too. My entire identity is a lie. Who am I?" My mum reached across the table again, taking my hand, her touch. Still familiar, comforting, but now imbued with a desperate urgency. "Cassie, your name, Cassie Vance, is the only name we've ever truly wanted for you. We chose it with love. Your birth certificate was legitimate, but issued under our new names. You were born free, a blank slate not burdened by our past. We built this life for you hoping you'd never have to know. We were so wrong. We were so wrong to think we could hide it forever." The full weight of their confession crashed down on me. It wasn't just a shocking revelation. It was an entire redefinition of my existence. My parents, my childhood, my identity. It was all tangled in this dark, complex web of crime, ideology, love, and fear. The truth was out. But now, what the hell was I supposed to do with it? My life, my very being, had just been handed to me in a box, complete with a new, terrifying set of instructions. And I had no idea where to even begin. The quiet suburban house, once my sanctuary, now felt like a ticking time bomb. The silence, broken only by the sound of their ragged breathing and my own pounding heart. The confession, stark and horrifying, hung in the air, a thick, suffocating cloud that felt heavier than the Oregon humidity. My mum was still sobbing, her body racked with tremors, my dad stony-faced, both looking like shells of the people I'd known just hours before. I sat there, paralysed, the sheer gravity of it all pressing down on me, crushing my chest. The raw, unfiltered truth, years of it, spilled out in less than an hour. And now? Now what? The immediate aftermath was a swirling vortex of emotions: shock, anger, profound sadness, a crushing sense of betrayal, and a terrifying, bone-deep sense of responsibility. The first instinct for me was to scream, to rage, to throw every single piece of their carefully constructed lie back in their faces, to tear down the veneer of normalcy with my bare hands. But I was too numb, too stunned. Instead, a chilling, terrifying thought settled in. What did this mean? For me, my parents were fugitives, wanted by the federal government. By extension, I was the daughter of fugitives. Was I complicit, even unknowingly? Was I in danger? Would the FBI suddenly descend on our perfectly manicured lawn, sirens wailing, lights flashing, to drag them away and interrogate me? The fear was visceral, a cold, icy knot that twisted my stomach until it ached. My dad, seeing my terror-stricken face, finally broke his silence. He reached across the table, hesitant, then pulled his hand back as if afraid to touch me. "Cassie, We understand if you're angry, if you hate us, and we deserve it. But you have to understand. We kept you safe. We never wanted you to be involved in our past. You are not complicit, you were a child, you still are our child, and that's all you ever were in this. Am I? I whispered, my voice cracked, barely audible. If my name's not even really mine, if my whole life is a lie, then who am I? Cassie Vance isn't real, it's just a made-up name for a made-up life. The identity crisis hit me like a tidal wave, pulling me under. Cassie Vance. It was the only name I'd ever known, the name on my birth certificate, my school records, my friendships, my college degree from Oregon State. My entire sense of self, my very foundation, was tied to it. Was it even real? Was I a legitimate person in the eyes of the law, or was I merely an extension of their aliases, a ghost in the system, a walking contradiction? My mum pulled herself together with a visible effort, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Your birth certificate is real, Cassie. It was issued in Portland under Arthur and Eleanor Vance. Legally, you are Cassie Vance. Your life, your education, your future. It's all legitimate. We made sure of that. We paid taxes, we had bank accounts. We followed every rule that didn't expose our past. You are not a fugitive. You are not complicit. You are our daughter, and you are innocent in all of this. That offered a sliver of comfort, a thin, fragile thread of normalcy in the overwhelming chaos. I wasn't going to be arrested, interrogated, or have my life immediately dismantled by federal agents. But the emotional devastation was immense. The trust, once absolute and unquestioning, was shattered beyond repair. How could I ever look at them the same way? How could I ever believe anything they said again, even if it was something as simple as good morning? We talked, or rather, they confessed, for hours into the deep night. They recounted their past with the Earth Zealots in more agonizing detail. The initial idealism, the passionate rallies against corporations like Evergreen Lumber, the escalating frustrations with the system, and then the slow, terrifying descent into more radical, more violent tactics. They spoke of the internal debates within their specific cell, the arguments over whether property damage was enough, whether financial disruption was justifiable, whether their actions could truly make a difference. The bank robbery, they explained, was a culmination of their despair and their desperation to make a real, undeniable impact against the corporate machine. They genuinely believed they were fighting for something bigger than themselves, for the future of the planet, for generations to come. And the money, the $1.2 million, truly was largely channeled into covert environmental projects, though some was reserved for their escape and new lives. We know it sounds crazy now, Cassie, my dad admitted, his voice hollow, his eyes fixed on a distant point. We were young. We were zealous. We truly believed we were saving the world, one act at a time. But we never hurt anyone. We never wanted to. The bank was empty except for the tellers, and they were cooperative. It was about the money, about the statement, not about violence against people. I understood the ideology, intellectually. I could even, in a twisted, disturbing way, understand the desperation that could lead people to such extreme actions. But I couldn't forgive the deception, the 2 decades of lies, the theft of my own reality. It felt like they had stolen my childhood, not just their own. The next few days were a blur of raw emotion and strained silence. We ate meals in quiet tension, the clinking of silverware unnaturally loud. My parents were constantly watching me, their eyes filled with a desperate hope for forgiveness, for understanding, for a sign that I hadn't completely abandoned them. I found myself retreating to my room, trying to process it all, trying to rebuild my understanding of the world from scratch. My friends, Chloe and Sarah, kept texting, asking if I wanted to hang out, why I was so quiet, so withdrawn. I couldn't tell them. How do you casually drop that your parents are bank robbing? Environmental fugitives? It felt like I was living on a different planet, orbiting a sun made of lies, while everyone else floated by, oblivious. My routine changed. I started double-checking locks, not just once, but multiple times. I found myself instinctively scanning, Crowds when I went out, looking for threats, for recognition, for someone watching me, just like my dad had inadvertently taught me to do. I started thinking about the Millers, our family friends, Harold and Martha. Now, knowing their connection, should I confront them too? Should I tell them I knew? That was an even more terrifying thought. Were they still active in the cause? What if they were still connected to dangerous people, people even more extreme than my parents? The legal implications haunted me, a constant, nagging dread. What was my obligation? Do I call the FBI? Do I turn in my parents? The thought twisted, my stomach into knots. These were the people who raised me, who loved me, who made countless sacrifices for my safety and my supposed normal life. But they were also criminals, wanted by the federal government for a serious felony. My moral compass was spinning wildly, throwing sparks. I was caught between filial loyalty and civic duty, and the weight of that choice was crushing, suffocating. I tried to rationalize it. They hadn't hurt anyone. They had seemingly left that life behind for me. They weren't living lavishly off stolen money. They had lived a quiet, unassuming life, spending carefully. But the fact remained. They were fugitives. And their crime was substantial. $1.2 million is not pocket change, no matter the ideology. I spent hours researching cold cases, federal statutes of limitations, the nuances of being an accessory after the fact. I knew I wasn't an accessory, but the proximity, the shared history, the current knowledge, it felt dangerously close, like I was teetering on the edge of a moral and legal precipice. Every Google search felt like I was walking a tightrope, over a bottomless chasm, one wrong move, and everything could fall apart. I found myself oscillating wildly between moments of profound sadness for my parents, for the life of fear they had lived, for the idealism that had led them astray, and raging anger at their choices and their decades of deceit. One moment, I'd look at my mum's tired, desperate face and feel a surge of protective love, a gut-wrenching ache for her pain. The next, I'd see the mugshot of Sarah Jenkins in my mind, her wild, defiant eyes, and a cold wall would rise between us. Impenetrable. The identity crisis was the hardest part. I looked at old photos of myself as a child, smiling, oblivious, and felt a profound sense of loss, a grief for a childhood that never truly existed. The innocence was gone, replaced by a cynical awareness. The foundation of my identity, the Cassie Vance, born and raised in Maplewood, felt like a fairy tale that had abruptly, cruelly ended. Who was I truly, if everything I knew about my origins was a carefully constructed fiction? Was I a product of their ideology? Did their rebellious, anti-establishment spirit flow in my veins, dormant until now? Or was I just a normal girl, thrust into an impossible reality that I had no part in creating? I started having nightmares, flashing police lights, blurred faces from newspaper clippings, the chilling echo of headlines, and my parents' faces shifting from loving smiles to the haunted, desperate eyes of fugitives. Sleep offered no escape. It only brought the terror closer. I needed professional help, but who could I talk to? A therapist? How do you explain this without bringing down the full force of the law on your family? A friend? No way. The secret was too big, too dangerous, too unbelievable. I was utterly alone with this monumental burden, suffocating under its weight. One morning, my dad found me in the kitchen, staring blankly out the window at the familiar, yet now alien, Maplewood Street. He approached me slowly, cautiously, like I was a wild animal he was trying to tame, or perhaps a bomb that might explode. "Cassie," he said softly, his voice full of a regret that permeated the room. "We know this is a lot, and we don't expect you to forgive us right away. We don't even know if you ever can, but please know everything we did after the initial act we did for you, to give you a future, to give you a choice we didn't have." "A future built on a lie?" I retorted, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "A choice that I never asked for, that was forced on me." He sighed, running a hand over his face, looking utterly defeated. We hoped you'd never have to know. We wanted to take it to our graves to shield you from this truth forever, but now you do. And now, we just want to know what you want us to do. Whatever you decide, Cassie, we will do it. We put your safety and happiness above everything else." His words, meant to be comforting, meant to give me agency, just highlighted the impossible situation. They were putting the burden of their decades-long lie on my shoulders. I had to decide their fate, my fate, the fate of my entire family. It was a choice no 22-year-old should ever have to make, and I knew, with a terrifying clarity, that whatever decision I made, nothing would ever be normal again. The old reality was shattered beyond repair. The new one was terrifyingly uncertain, a landscape of wreckage. My dad's question hung in the air, a suffocating demand that resonated in every corner of the house. "Whatever you decide, Cassie, we will do it." The weight of that choice was immense. It felt like holding their lives, and implicitly, my own, in my trembling hands. My 22-year-old self, who was supposed to be worried about internship applications and friend drama, was now grappling with whether to turn in her own parents to the FBI for a 2-decade-old bank robbery. It was beyond surreal. It was a hellish game of high stakes, and I was the reluctant player. For days I walked around in a fog, barely eating, barely sleeping more than a couple of hours, tormented by nightmares. My parents were like ghosts, moving quietly, tentatively around me, their faces etched with anxiety and sorrow. They looked at me with a desperate plea in their eyes, a silent begging for forgiveness, for understanding, for a sign that I hadn't completely abandoned them. It was unbearable, the unspoken pressure, the constant awareness of their fragile existence hanging by a thread of my decision. I knew I couldn't live with this secret any longer, nor could I allow them to continue living, under this sword of Damocles, this constant fear of exposure. The paranoia, the fear of exposure, was already affecting my mum's health. She was losing weight. Her hands would tremble. And I could see it in my dad's haunted eyes, the way he flinched at sudden sounds. This hidden life had taken its toll on them too, corroding them from the inside out. But the thought of turning them in, of seeing them arrested, tried, imprisoned, it tore me apart. These were still my parents, the people who had loved me, raised me, flawed as they were. I started researching lawyers specializing in federal cases, particularly those involving long-term fugitives or identity fraud. I couldn't call one directly from our home phone, not yet. I used a public library computer in a neighbouring town, one far from Maplewood, and browsed law firm websites, trying to understand the legal landscape without leaving a trace, without arousing any suspicion from potential online tracking. It was a terrifying education. The sentences for bank robbery and identity fraud could be severe, even with the passage of time. I also considered the alternative, running with them. The thought flashed through my mind, a dark, tempting escape from this impossible choice. Disappear, create new identities, live on the fringes, constantly looking over my shoulder. But that life was a life of fear, constant vigilance, no roots, no real connections, no true identity. It was the life they had lived, and I had seen its corrosive effect, the way it had stolen their peace. I didn't want it. I wanted my life back, even if it was a new, redefined one rebuilt on truth no matter how painful. After a week of this agonizing internal battle, this silent torment, I finally called a family meeting. We sat at the same dining table where everything had been revealed, but this time the cold lasagna was gone, replaced by empty space. My voice was calm, but firm, unwavering. "We need to address this, legally," I stated, looking from my mum's tear-swollen eyes to my dad's stoic, resigned face. "We can't live like this anymore, and I can't live knowing this. Always. Looking over my shoulder for you." My mum gasped, a small, desperate sound. "Cassie, no, please. We can just keep going. We've been so careful for so long. We can move somewhere else. Start again." "No, Mom. You haven't been careful." "Enough. I found out. What if someone else does? What if the FBI gets a new lead from an old informant? What if the Millers get caught, Harold or Martha, and turn you in for a plea deal? The risk is too high, for all of us, and I can't bear it anymore. I took a deep, shaky breath, steeling myself. I think you need to turn yourselves in. Cooperate fully. Tell them everything. Their faces crumpled. My mum started shaking her head violently, sobbing, "No, Arthur, no, please. We can't." My dad, however, looked at me, a long, assessing look, full of a profound sadness, but also understanding. He knew I was right. He knew the precarious, fragile life they had built was unsustainable now that I knew the truth. Their deepest fear, his fear, had always been about my discovery, about my safety, about their secret tainting my existence. And now that I had the knowledge, the dynamic had shifted completely. He knew he had lost his leverage, his ability, to control the narrative, to protect me through lies. "We'll find a lawyer," I continued, pushing through the pain, through the rising tide of my own tears. "A good one. One who specialises in this kind of complex federal case. Will explain everything. The ideology behind the robbery, the non-violence, the fact that you left that life behind immediately to raise me. Maybe there's a chance. For a plea deal. For leniency. For a reduced sentence for cooperation and good conduct." My mum was inconsolable, collapsing into my dad's arms, weeping uncontrollably. My dad sat in silence for a long, unbearable minute. Then finally, he nodded, a heavy, defeated nod that sent a pang through my heart. "Okay, Cassie," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, choked with emotion. "Okay, we'll do it. We'll do what you think is right. For you." That decision set off a chain of events that utterly rocked our small, quiet world. I found a highly recommended federal defense attorney in Portland, a sharp, formidable woman named Ms. Davies, who had a reputation for handling complex, sensitive cases with a no-nonsense approach. I contacted her, cautiously, over a burner phone I bought at a gas station, pretending to be a legal aid researcher initially, gauging her reaction to hypothetical scenarios involving decades-long fugitives. When I felt confident in her discretion and expertise, I told her I had clients who were considering turning themselves in after living as fugitives for 2 decades for a bank robbery. The day my parents, Ronald Miller and Sarah Jenkins, walked into the FBI field office in Portland, accompanied by Ms. Davies, was the hardest day of my life. I didn't go. I couldn't bear to see it. I waited at home, a bundle of nerves, my phone clutched in my hand, staring at the perfectly normal suburban street outside. The call came hours later from Ms. Davies. My parents had surrendered. They were being processed. They had given their true names, Ronald Miller and Sarah Jenkins, and they had confessed to the 1999 Liberty Savings Bank robbery. They were arrested, formally charged, and bail was denied. The news broke quietly at first, a local Oregon news story about an unsolved cold case from Los Angeles finally being closed after 22 years. But then, as the national media picked up the story, as the sensational fugitive parents living a suburban lie angle gained traction, it exploded. "My childhood was a lie," screamed a headline in the New York Post, along with a photo of our perfectly normal, charming 2-story house. Photos of my parents, their Eleanor and Arthur faces, not their mugshots, photos of Maplewood Elementary and the town library, were plastered everywhere. Reporters descended on Maplewood like vultures, swarming our quiet street, harassing. Our neighbours knocking on our door. Chloe and Sarah, my best friends, saw the news reports. They were shocked, horrified, confused. I had to tell them the bare bones, that my parents had a past I never knew, that they were living under new identities. They were incredibly supportive, though clearly reeling, asking a million questions I couldn't answer. The Millers, our family friends, Harold and Martha, were also identified and arrested shortly after my parents' surrender, adding another layer of scandal and devastation to our small town. Their kids, who were my age, must have been going through a similar hell, and I felt a strange kinship with them now. The public scrutiny was brutal. People in Maplewood, our neighbours, friends, my mum's students' parents. They were stunned, hurt, feeling betrayed by the pillars of their community, the unassuming librarian and the beloved teacher. Some were surprisingly sympathetic, arguing my parents had paid their dues, living in fear for decades, and that their motives were rooted in idealism. Others were furious, condemning them as common criminals who had corrupted their quiet town. Our house became a symbol of deception, a local landmark of betrayal. I received hate mail, online threats, even bizarre letters from radical environmental groups praising my parents as heroes, urging me to continue their legacy. It was a circus, a daily onslaught of judgment and opinion. My parents were formally charged with bank robbery, conspiracy, and identity fraud. Bail was denied. They were held in federal custody awaiting trial. The legal process was slow, arduous, and terrifyingly expensive. Ms. Davies worked tirelessly, arguing for their cooperation, their profound remorse, their 2 decades of quiet, law-abiding lives, and the fact that they had turned themselves in. She highlighted their original motivation, the environmental cause, not personal greed, though that was a double-edged sword. Some in the public and legal system saw it as admirable, others saw it as a thinly veiled excuse for criminality. Visited them in jail, a sterile, dehumanizing environment so far removed from the cosy home life I had always known. It was agonizing. My mum would cry, begging me to be strong, telling me she loved me, that I was the best thing they ever did. My dad, still stoic, would talk about the legal strategy, but his eyes would always soften when he looked at me, a silent apology, a desperate plea for understanding. It was hard, so hard. The love was still there, undeniably, but it was complicated by layers of betrayal and pain, a love stained by their choices. The trial date was set. It was going to be a long, public ordeal, months away, but looming. The media circus was only going to intensify. My life, Cassie Vance's life, was now inexorably linked to Ronald Miller and Sarah Jenkins, bank robbers. My identity crisis deepened. Every time someone recognized me from a news report, every time I saw my story splashed across the internet, it felt like a fresh wound, a public dissection of my private pain. I was no longer just me. I was the daughter of the fugitives. Trust, the fundamental pillar of any relationship, any community, was shattered. Not just between me and my parents, but between me and the world. How could I ever trust anyone again, when the people who were supposed to be my safe harbour, my unwavering foundation, had built their entire existence on a lie? The future was a vast, terrifying unknown, stretching out before me like a desolate landscape. But at least for the first time in my life it felt honest. That was the only thing I could hold on to. The fight for a new reality had just begun. And so here we are, at the quiet end of a story that feels, even to me, like a lifetime lived in a single night. The echoes of those revelations, the shattering of the glass house of my past, still linger, but now they're softer, like distant bells fading into the pre-dawn hush. It's a strange thing, isn't it, to finally look at your true reflection after years of only seeing a ghost? To finally feel the solidity of the ground beneath your feet, even if it was built on shifting sands. The truth, when it finally unfurled itself, was a hurricane. It tore through every assumption, every cherished memory, leaving behind a landscape I barely recognised. But what I've learned, quietly and profoundly, in the years since, is that from that devastation, something remarkably resilient can grow. A truer self, an identity not handed down, but forged in the crucible of honest self-discovery. It's a journey of quiet acceptance, of finding a peace that isn't born of ignorance but of understanding. If there's any whisper I can leave with you as the night deepens, it's this. Never shy away from the quiet nudges of your intuition, the whispers of unease that hint at deeper currents beneath the surface. And know that even the most devastating truths, when faced with courage, can become the fertile ground for your most authentic life. There is an immense quiet strength in living aligned with who you truly are, even when that means shedding who you once thought you were. It's okay for the echoes of this story to drift through your mind, to gently settle as you prepare for rest. My hope is that it leaves you with a sense of the profound beauty in resilience and the quiet power of truth. no matter how long it takes to find it. It's time now to let these thoughts soften, to let them melt into the quiet comfort of the coming dawn or the peaceful depths of slumber. Thank you for listening all the way through. I wish you tranquil thoughts and the sweetest of dreams.